This is Chill Bill coming at you live from Caterol, introducing another segment of the 10th anniversary celebration of Skylanders Portalcasters. Over to you, Inklander.
Thanks, Chill Bill. Joining us for this segment, we have another special guest, Dave Huddleston, who worked as an animator on Spyro's Adventure, Giants, and Trap Team, and also as the lead animator on Skylanders Imaginators. So, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here.
So, I guess for our first question, how were you introduced to animation, and what inspired you to go into that field?
Oh man, so I've been drawing since I was like 6 years old. I always thought back in that time, like video games wasn't a real career. So I was trying to figure out kind of my direction to go. My dad was a police officer, and so I decided to kind of venture into that direction. So I went to Sac State for a bit to study criminal justice. But the entire time I was playing games, and that was just my interest. And I was just like, I wish I could do this for a living. And so eventually I looked into how could I do that. And I found Cogswell Polytechnical Institute, which was kind of a college that was really close by and pretty much had what I need. And so I kind of just took the plunge out of like a year and a half going to Sac State. And then my original goal was to go into film animation because I've always loved animation. And it was actually the original Fallout games, Fallout 1 and 2, that got me really into animation. Just in a sense of like, I want to make animation, I want to make games kind of thing. So I went into, Cogswell to originally go for film animation because I thought that was like a better career. But again, I kept getting into games. I was in game club in Cogswell, playing games with friends all the time. It was just like this natural progression. And I actually went to college with Paul Yan. We were in some of the same classes over there. But my final class, which was Animation 3, was with Iwe. Iwe was my actual teacher there. And he told me there's a spot open at Toys for Bob for a junior animator. And at that time, it was just, about getting into the industry. And I think it kind of is that way of just like getting your first steps in the door, and then you start meeting people and you start like branching out from there. But like one of your hardest jobs back then is just to get into the door. So Iwe offered me an interview, but I had to get like a game reel going. So I spent that entire semester getting my game reel up and running. So I was able to actually get in on a contract with Toys for Bob 2004, and it was like for a 6-month contract. And then after that, I was able to actually get on as an animator, and I was there for 18 years. And I just recently, like maybe 2 months ago, quit TFB, and now I'm working at Phoenix Labs. It's been an adventure.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's really cool. That's also quite fun to know that Iwe was your professor.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. He taught me all the hacky sack skills. I know. That was the cool thing at Toys for Bob back then. When I first showed up at TFB, just in the game industry, it was kind of a wild experience. Just because after like 3 o'clock was always mandatory, like hacky sacking, and we'd just go out for like an hour just for fun in the parking lot and do random hacky sack stuff. And I was never really into hacky sack, but he got me into it. I'm a big soccer player. I still play soccer, so it kind of helped out with that, I would think. But it was just something stupid and fun to do. We did that every day, and then at 5 o'clock every day as well, we'd play Unreal right at the end. Iwe would turn up his speaker all the way, and then he would go up and down on the menu system just to get us all into it. And then everybody would jump on a server and we'd be playing Unreal. So stuff like that was just so fun.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean that sounds like a good job to me. You got
Uh-huh.
time to take a little bit of a break, get those ideas flowing. I think that's pretty cool.
It sounds like a
Absolutely.
really nice workplace environment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It was. We eventually got a giant ping pong table to no, it was giant. I guess it was normal size ping pong table. And there were so many people in the studio that you wouldn't expect them to be insanely good, and then they just blow you out of the water kind of thing. And we had a lot of fun doing that too. A lot of challenges and back and forth with that. But yeah, it
Awesome.
was definitely a fun environment.
So, what was the process like for animating the characters, and did any of the characters' moves or movesets change over time, and why?
Oh, the movesets. Oh, well, the process for animating characters is a little bit different for different people. So we had an animator named Neil Wershnick, who is an amazing animator. He liked to use a lot of reference, actually acted out reference. And that's actually what I do a lot more of now, but I didn't do it back then. It was much more of finding likeness references and seeing how we can implement that to the character. So we would have meetings about some characters, and we do it a lot in dailies as well. Dailies is a daily meeting where animators where we go and talk about characters, and a lot of times we would go into there and try to figure out a character, like what kind of movement is, let's say, Spyro when he's on all fours, and we'd take a look at some type of movement sets on like what would be best for them. We would look at Spyro's concept and be like, okay, is he more like a cat, or is he more like a dog, or is he something in between? Does he move like a skunk or something like that? And so we kind of try to find the likeness of animal that they are alike, and then we would go and reference that in like YouTube. YouTube is a huge source of where we found a lot of reference for that, and then just like movements in general, also like attacks and deaths and stuff like that. You could all find that on YouTube, and it's a great source for reference. Movement sets, though, move sets, I don't think anyone really changed. Not that I can really think of, because the characters that were animated before, we just pretty much brought over from the last game. And yeah, I don't think we ever touched it. We had way too much time that we had to put on all the new characters, that we didn't really touch any of the old characters unless it was like new animation stuff to actually do, like within cutscenes and stuff like that.
Did any of these animations change during development? Like, was there ever a time where you thought you really had the like animation of a character down, and then like midway through development, you're like, oh no, never mind, this totally doesn't work at all. We need to go with this.
Oh, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that like any of the animation sets really changed. The way we do it in animation is that like your idle and your run are the most important animations, because that's pretty much what's going to set the character's mood. And you see the run the most. I think out of pretty much any like third person or top down game or something like that, the run is the thing that you will see the most. The idle is very important because you do see it, and you see it a lot. However, that's also almost like the neutral animation that all other animations go into. So if you have an idle animation, then later down on the line, like you're doing all these different animations, the jumps, the attacks, and stuff like that, that return to the idle pose. And then someone goes, "Oh, we need to change the idle animation." You now have to go through every single one of those animations and change that idle pose. And it's very tedious to actually have to go through a lot of those animations. The runs you can change because in general they're blended from idle to runs. If you get fancy, you can do like run ins and run outs where the character goes from idle to the runs. But in general, yeah, those don't change. I do vaguely remember us getting frustrated and someone wants to change like a certain aspect of an idol and go, okay, well, we need this arm lower in the idol. And it's like, oh, do you guys really want to change the idol? Is this like a really like, let's really think about this change. Is this something that we really want to do? Because, it does affect us a lot. Yeah, it'll take, a few days maybe to do, depending upon how many assets that you've actually already created. But I don't think we've ever really like changed a huge move set like that. I do remember one moment where I think it was the original Skylanders. We did a blob character, a blue blob character, and I worked on it for a month. And it got like approved by Activision. Everything was going super well with it. Everybody loved it. Designers loved it. I loved playing with it and stuff like that. But the lawyers came back and said, no, we can't do that because it looks too much like a character in a movie. And then that character was nixed just like that. That was a killer one. That wasn't too fun for me.
Yeah, and I think that character eventually became Zap, right?
Zap. I don't remember. I don't think so.
Zap is the water dragon who kind of has like the
Yes.
waves and everything.
Oh my gosh, good call. Yes, that is exactly who that was. Oh, that's funny. Yep. I totally forgot about that guy. because there's so many there's so many Skylanders.
We hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it up to? Like 300 something?
It's 339, including reposes and color variants.
Oh man, yeah.
But not including the chase variants. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Regarding the move sets or moveset changes, the poses definitely went through a lot of changes, like you're saying. Like the different poses on different characters, those definitely did change differently. Yeah. I remember talking with Iwe about those sometimes.
And then also once jumping got added in, I know Vicarious Visions obviously their team was working on the animations there. But then in Trap Team, we got the addition of some characters being able to attack while jumping. So I guess what was that process like of having to go back in and add stuff like that?
They weren't really happy about it. I know the designers, I think, fought back and forth about that, about adding jumping, which is why it wasn't in the first game. Just because you're adding just a huge new dynamic to it of going up and down, and then just like the levels themselves, you have to like block off a lot of stuff so characters can't jump over stuff, and it's a lot more troublesome. But in the end, I think it's definitely better for it. For sure. Yeah, we did have to revisit a lot of those animations, but I think that we just put that in the pipeline, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. I think generally fans are pretty happy about the addition of jumping and adding jump attacks in.
Yeah,
I know
right?
I am.
Yeah, I think it definitely adds a lot to it. It definitely changes up the dynamic, though. I mean, you start off as like a Diablo-esque type game, and then you move on to almost like the third person jump puzzle stuff, and you can use those jumps in the jump puzzles.
Yeah, I think Skylanders started out as like a dungeon crawler, kind of as you said, but then once the jumping got added in, it really became its own thing. I guess you could sort of compare it to the Lego games
Mm-hmm.
that had a very similar feel, but even then, the Skylanders games still feel very much like their own genre. Like they just took dungeon crawler and they took 3D platformer and just meshed them together, and it worked out really well.
Yep, totally.
What is the animation work from Skylanders that you're most proud of?
If you look me up, Dave Huddleston Skylanders on YouTube, you'll find my reels, and I think that encompasses a lot of the stuff that I was most proud of because I'm trying to show it off to. At that time, I wasn't looking for jobs. Well, I always had a reel because in the game industry, you heard so many like nightmare stories, even with a lot of people that came over to Toys for Bob. There were some bad things that happened in the game industry where companies would just shut down and would lock the doors, and that was the way you found out you didn't have a job anymore. And so I heard a few of those stories, and it was just like, oh man, are you serious? And so that kind of stuff like freaked me out. So I always had a reel after every single game I did. As a lead, I would encourage my team. I would take a few months time, and I'd be like, okay, this is the time we're going to do our reels. And it's not like Twitch Pop is going down or anything. I just wanted everyone to be ready because I wanted to be ready too. So if it did shut down, I had that. So if you look on there, there's a lot of fun stuff that I liked. Something that didn't get on is the transformation of the Chompy Mage into the big Chompy Mage and back and forth. I worked with Chris Nelson on that, and we were going just back and forth. And the amount of back and forth was really fun because, I would do an animation on both the characters, and I had no idea if it would work. I was just stretching and pulling these characters just so much, and I had no idea if it was working. And I would go to Chris, I'd be like, okay, the flip, I have to change this tiny little wizard character into this giant heavy set monster, and just trying to be able to figure that out was really fun for me to do. And I didn't want to hide it in effects. And if you play a lot of games, you'll see a lot of like transformations that characters do when they transform models. They'll be hidden in effects or they'll be hidden in cinematics. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be like, almost like an instant transformation that the player can actually watch and have fun seeing. And so I went back and forth with our rigger just to try to see if I could get the controls and like squish and break the character as much as possible. And then once I was able to do that, and established that. I did the animation, then I went back and forth with Chris Nelson about how we were going to do it and how we were going to put it in game and how that flip would be just like over a frame. And so I had to kind of like pull and stretch the Chompy Mage into like the shape that the beginning frame of the big Chompy was. And then I had to make the big Chompy like super skinny on the first frame and then kind of squish him down. And then he pops up. Getting through that process was actually a lot of fun. And then that moment when you see it in game and it works, was such a cool moment for me to see that and just like, it worked all this time, all this gambling, it worked. It was just, yeah, it felt like such a gamble for me just because of the tools I was working with. That was probably one of the most fondest memories I have of that, because of like the restrictions that we had back then in that game. We actually have better rigs now that we can actually do more of that stuff. We have stronger engines that actually can handle that. And so just working with the restrictions was elation when we actually like figured it out, and there was high-fiving and everything. So yeah, that is definitely probably one of the more fonder memories.
Is there anything you wish you could change? Is there anything that did make it in the game
Oh,
that you look at now that you wish was like
oh
better?
yeah, for sure. You ask any artist throughout their years of like looking at their own art, there's always stuff that you can look back and change and be like, "Oh, I thought that was good." Oh man. And that's one thing that like I guess I'm proud of myself for, is that I think I'm a much better animator. I don't think I'm a better drawer. Which, because I started looking through a lot of the old sketch pads and notebooks that I had for those games, and I was like, wow, I was a really good artist back then. But I'm happy where my animation has gone, and it's like, of course, like I would totally want to revisit that stuff and touch it up, and yeah, I even wanted to do it back then, but I was just like, I'm just too busy with like newer characters to actually go back and touch on the older stuff. But I definitely wanted to, for sure, 100%. And I mean, you could almost say that for any character, but it is what it is, and it's been released, and those things aren't changed, so you kind of just like live with it.
How collaborative was the process between yourself, the character designers and concept artists, and the programmers when it came to designing how the characters were animated, and what was that like?
Oh, that's a great question, because I mean, I think that's the one thing that really separates movies much more so than games, is that there's so much more input that you have into a lot of those moments of like figuring out Skylanders. Generally, we would get a design concept from Eway, and I would badger him about like lore, like any type of history that he could get behind the character, and be like, what's this character about? What do you think about this character? Of like, where are they from, etc., like that. And it was always met with like shoulders up. It's like, I don't know. What do you want to do? He was so insanely creative with his designs that he just like he came out with them on the spot, and like him and Paul Ritchie would work hand in hand trying to figure out the characters. So I ended up going to Paul Ritchie a lot of times with those, and he would usually give me like a lot of the backstory or just idea of where he was thinking about the character. So once I established that, you would end up like talking to the designer as well. And that's kind of your next step, is to figure out what kind of attacks they might want the character to have. We would touch base on like run cycles and stuff like that. I know we always tried to push asymmetrical run cycles, but they always failed. So we had to go back to just basically symmetrical run cycles. And hops are bad too in run cycles. That's just a little tidbit, just because designers like to turn the characters really fast. So the faster movement with feet usually is better. A lot of Skylanders actually did do that, but I believe we got away with some interesting run cycles overall. But yeah, once you establish like the run cycles, the attacks, and just kind of figure out the character, we generally had a good notion of what they needed. And so we'd do a blocking pass, which is in animation, you block out the main poses of an animation just to show the idea of the animation. And it shows timing, it shows the idea that you're trying to get across, and you can come out with a blocking pass within like an hour to 2 hours. And once you get that blocking pass, you can throw that to the designer and they can put that in game instantly. In general, like designers would already have a character in game playing the idea of the character that they want. And so they could just like plug in your character model with like the character attacks and runs and idles and stuff like that, even like if it's like blocked out, so they could actually just start getting a better feel for the character. And that was kind of a cool thing, an interesting thing I think about the characters is that the designers and everyone else would work separately and then they would eventually come together. So each one of these Skylanders characters has like 3 names and it's not the name at the end. So when you said Zap, I had no idea what you were talking about because those character names are named like maybe a month before release and we have no idea of any of these characters' names. So when we get them, usually it's called like water elemental or water melee or character. And that's how we animate. And that's how we knew the character through the entire development. And not only that, but like we know them as that. But the designers who are designing a character, they know them as something else because they're designing with very basic characters. And it doesn't look anything like the Skylanders that we have, but they tend to just like fit like other characters into those designs and be like, oh man, this looks good. Okay, let's try it here. Because they try to figure out the fun before actually even putting in the character. And so, yeah, when we actually married those together, then it would have 2 or 3 separate names that were kind of going back and forth. And then, you know, if there's any effects or anything, you would talk to the VFX guys to see, you know, how those are coming together and like what you might be thinking of the direction of the effects. And then from there, it kind of goes off and it goes into like sound. We didn't really deal with too much with the programmers on characters. We dealt more with the programmers when we had issues with like Maya or the engine itself. In general, like you would think, okay, the designers, they sit over here and the animators, they sit over here and programmers sit over there with programmers. And I think one of the coolest things that Toys for Bob did is they said, no, okay, we're going to start mix and matching. And they start putting like designers right across from the animators in the row of the animators. That was an awesome idea. I think we got that from Vicarious Visions because they kind of do that as well. And so that allows us to just instantly talk with the designers and go back and forth. And it was just a constant back and forth. There's much more interaction with them on characters and iterations and testing. And so I think that was a huge, huge benefit. And I think we did that on Trap Team.
Very cool. You were also the lead animator on Skylanders Imaginators, so I have to ask, there's like thousands of different parts that you can put on your Imaginator and map them to a skeleton.
Yep.
How awful was that?
That was interesting. One of the smartest things we did with that is, okay, so you have your base mesh, which is your base character, and for us it was just this light gray humanoid character for, you know, the humanoid guy. You also had like the small guy, so we had a few different body types for those, but we would actually animate them to some of the biggest armor pieces and stuff like that, just so it wasn't too bad when the mesh started like intersecting, and you had some clipping stuff. But eventually we just said, you know, we're just going to leave it and let it go. One thing about the Imaginators is that you know, you could create your own Imaginators. Did you guys ever order your own specific Imaginator?
I
I
wanted
did.
to, but sadly, no.
Every single one of those Imaginators that people ordered online, I saw. And I had to go through each one of the files and I had to make sure that there wasn't any clipping in it before you got your custom toy. So I also had to shift the model sometimes so that, you know, the bigger pieces were touching other pieces. So we kind of wanted a little bit of clipping there just because it was more supportive when you actually got the model. But every one of those came through the animators and we were all doing those. It was kind of
That's
wild
neat.
that we actually had to do that undertaking. And then when, you know, it stopped, we kind of just stopped finally.
When that was being advertised and everything, it always kind of seemed depicted like it was a completely separate company that was doing it. But no, it
Hmm.
was Toys for Bob, as
Nope,
I've
it
been
was
finding
us.
out.
It was we thought it would be a different company too. They're like, no, No, you guys, and I mean, it was okay because the game was pretty much had already gone gold, I think, and then they just had us doing that through the Christmas season. But I mean, our game had already been released by then, so we were that was kind of our downtime. So we had the time to do it, and it just made sense.
Speaking of downtime, there was also DLC for Imaginators as well, the first time that ever happened for any of the Skylanders games. When did you know you were doing the DLC? Did you start that during the main game, or was that something that happened during the downtime for making the Imaginators?
From what I remember, that was done at the same time because those were in the base game. So I believe we did do those at the same time.
Okay, yeah, because eventually they did patch in two more levels that weren't originally on the game disc.
That
So
might
that's
have
why
happened, yeah.
What was some of the magic moment concepting like? How and why did it evolve over time into a wormhole?
A wormhole, it did. Oh man, that's right. What was the first one like? I totally forget.
it was like a barren, empty space. I don't know how to describe it. There's like mist kind of flying up from like the center of the screen,
Yeah.
and it's all kind of just like a bluish tent, and it's like
Yeah.
void. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't remember. I think that might have been like a higher up design decision. I can't even remember when it's up, but I do remember like when I was making my reel, I did have some of the later characters, and they do get like sucked up to the sky. So I totally don't remember what the originals were, and I don't remember when that actually changed or why it did. I'm sorry. Oh
Well,
man, that's yeah.
the animation and trap team for like the wormhole reminds me a lot of Doctor Who.
Mm,
Hmm.
Yeah, so
yeah.
it really made me think, they just took the David Tennant wormhole opening titles from Doctor Who and just basically put it in Skylanders.
Yep, yep.
I
Yeah, as you
remember
could.
seeing early concept animations of basically where you could still see what was going on in the game in the background for the start, but characters were being switched out, and that
Yep.
was really really cool to see.
Yeah, oh man, that whole development cycle of like when we first were told to do something new with Spyro, and everybody was coming up with ideas. Imagine an entire studio just shooting ideas left and right. It all just morphed into the Toys to Life thing. It was cool to see with Eway doing some of the first toys that were made out of, I think they were made out of like clay, and then Robert would stick a RFID chip in there. So cool.
It's still really magical.
That's cool.
Even knowing the technology behind it, it's still very, very cool.
Hmm.
So, what was the switch over to Vicarious Vision's engine like for the later games, and how did that process affect like programming and animation?
They had some cool stuff, and they had some stuff that we definitely weren't used to. Engine switches are always kind of like that. It's just like you get used to a certain thing in an engine and how you implement your animations and stuff like that, and then you find like new cool ideas about like what stuff was happening. Like from what I remember from Vicarious Visions engine was that they had like live updating. So I would implement my animations, and then I would see those changes as the game was running. And that blew my mind. I was like, you could do that? What? That's amazing. Because we would always have to take our animations, put them in engine, fire up the build, see our animations, and be like, oh, okay, I need to change that. Make a slight change, and then commit it, and then rebuild it, and then we would be able to see our. So it took so much time away from doing that. That was one of the cool things I remember. Overall, animation wise, we don't touch the engine a ton. We do much more now just because we're messing with blend states and like blending animations into each other, and how, soft the blends are and stuff like that, and like a little more fancier things that we could do. But back then there wasn't a ton of blending going on. There was some still, but for the most part what we'd do is we'd finish our animations in Maya, and I've worked in Maya my whole career. In general, like programmers made a exporter in Maya, and we would export those animations, and then we would commit them to a file sharing program called like a Perforce, and then we'd just update the designers and be like, hey, those animations are in, throw them in. and then they would take those animations and then they would put them in game. A lot of those were like FBX exports and stuff like that. The only time that we would really jump into Engine was to check out how our animations ran in Engine before they actually ran in game, because sometimes you could actually see problems arise just from the viewport that the engine actually gives of your animations. You could see, okay, this is not running the same way that it's in Maya, so I need to adjust for that.
Vicarious Visions Alchemy, was that also used on Spyro Reignited and also on Crash 4?
That was not. We moved to Unreal. I really liked Unreal. Yeah, I still like it because it's very user friendly, it's very animator friendly, and if you ever have a question on how do I do this in Unreal, you could type it up and look it up. Even you guys could download it without any money that you have to pay for it, and you could start developing a game. You know, the community is great for just doing whatever you want to do if you just want to do your own little game. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of back and forth, and it's very easily accessible to find any answer that you need for any Unreal stuff.
Now we just need all the fans to band together and make Skylanders 7 ourselves.
Yeah, you could do that. Might not want to call it Skylanders because like Activision lawyers, but I don't know if you could get around that.
Airlanders.
Yes, there
Airlanders.
you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I love it.
What was the best part about working on the Skylanders team?
Just like the people, I think. I have very fond memories of so many people that I worked with over the years. I built some great friendships, people I still talk to, I still like keep in contact with. But I would have to say one of my most memorable moments throughout the whole Skylanders experience was that I was the original animator on Eruptor, and seeing his evolution throughout all the games. And then on Imaginators, I got the final invite to go hold the Eruptor balloon in the Macy's Day Parade. I got to actually hold that balloon of the character that I helped do throughout the Macy's Day Parade, which I think there was like 4 million people there. And I got to do that with the other people that I helped create this character with.
Wow,
So that
that's really cool.
yeah, that was one of my most memorable, like impactful moments. But my favorite part is definitely the people that I got to work with. I love the TFB people. If there were any notions of like why people make games, Toys for Bob was just the sense that everybody loved games and we just loved doing the job that we did, and just being in the same, environment of those people. It's just you riff off each other all the time. You're having a blast. You're gonna make some amazing characters. People are like happy with the things that you're doing, and you're getting paid for it. Hey.
Now, what was an average day like at the Toys for Bob offices while working on Skylanders?
Get to work around 9:30 ish. You would have like a few meetings in the day, but in general, you would come in, figure out like what assets you're working on. You would generally have like an asset list, and we used Jira, this task program that you have like a bunch of tasks that are assigned to you, usually by your lead, and then that's how he's able to track it. And so you look at your Jira tasks, see what's available, and I think in general, the lead will help you like balance your task list and try to prioritize like what's more important, what needs to get done, what you can actually kind of do as like secondary tasks in case you'll fish your priority tasks. But generally it's always like what's most important to the game and the designer and who needs it like right now and why they need it. So once you go through your task list, you just start animating, and then eventually you go to lunch with your friends and whomever at work, because they're all amazing people and into different hobbies and stuff like that. And everybody had their hobby that they shared out. So lunches were always fun. And then we had dailies. We'd have animation dailies, probably around like 3 p.m. You'd show off the work that you've been working on throughout the day. And the dailies weren't to be judged or anything necessarily. Yes and no, I guess. But the dailies were to help the animators. It wasn't just more of like a progress report. It's like, okay, this is the animation I've been doing. I've been staring at it for hours. Please tell me, what it looks like on your end. And I think that's the biggest thing about dailies, is that you're bringing this thing in that you might think is at a certain point, but you've also been staring at it for hours. So you're kind of like stuck in this zone. And so animation dailies is to come down and for people to actually look at this and say, okay, your foot's looking like really funny right here, or I'm not understanding this motion right here. This other stuff is looking good, but this motion right here is kind of looking a bit off. And I thought that was the most valuable thing about dailies is everybody else's input. And the thing about being an animator, and I think an artist in general, is you can't get offended by your people criticizing your work. If they come and say that looks stupid, maybe you can get offended by that because it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you at all. But if they say this looks stupid because of this, and that, then that's something to grow on, and that's something to be able to adjust your work with. And so that was the main thing about dailies. And then once you got your critique, you got your notes and everything, then you can go back to work and work for a couple hours and possibly adjust those notes while it's still like fresh in your mind, and then kind of like rinse and repeat.
I like that. That was a really good in-depth analysis of what an animator was doing at Toys for Bob in a day. That's cool. That's great that they would have a chance to like give you daily feedback and help you keep working on it day by day. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, and then you would just sprinkle in random meetings here and there about random topics and stuff like that.
Do you have any advice for those aspiring to enter the video game industry?
There's a ton of great online courses. I'm speaking specifically for animators. I don't think I can really talk specifically to design and programmers, stuff like that. If you go to places like Cogswell Polytech, that can be a game focused college. They also have like film focused and sound focused and stuff like that. So definitely look around. I mean, the internet is a much easier place now to navigate for like colleges and stuff than it was in 2001 when I first started looking. But not only that, but there are some amazing online animation places that do like game specific animation. One of them is Anim School. Animation Mentor is really good for that. So if you're looking to get into animation, I would definitely recommend places like that. You can download courses as well for animation to start off with. They also like Maya and Max, I think, which is it's owned by the same people, but Maya allows for people to download software for free, and I believe you can use a student license for free just to learn throughout your college. But you can also use like Blender, which is a good animation program. If you're getting into the industry, I definitely use Maya because any and every studio is pretty much using Maya. And if you get an option to download something called Animbot for Maya, definitely use that because that's kind of the industry standard as well. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of great reading material out there and a lot of good starting points. So hopefully that can help any interested animators.
Awesome.
Now, as the first 10 years draws to a close, if you could say one thing to the fans regarding how you feel about this franchise and the community surrounding it, what would it be?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I love that people are still totally into it. When I heard you guys were doing it, I was like so ecstatic that the franchise is still going, because being able to play through it with my kids and just see the memories that I had just all coming back at once, like, oh man, I remember doing this character, I remember doing this level, and I remember this point when I was talking with this designer about this thing. So I'm ecstatic that it's still going. I'm super excited about that.
Well, it's just been a pleasure to be able to have you on. We're glad you could join us for this 10th anniversary celebration.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
It was our pleasure.
This segment might be over, but don't touch that dial, baby. Stay tuned for another segment of the Skylanders 10th anniversary celebration. Until then, this is Chill Bill, signing off.
Not to mention, I love playing as Hoodsicle.
Except steel-plated Hoodsicle, oh my.
We're not talking about that.